looking at questions Jesus asked. I appreciate Levi and Johnny and Leroy for helping out while I was away last week in Childersburg. It was good to reconnect with a lot of folks there. I had a really enjoyable time, and my only regret was when we were setting all that up, they asked me, said, "What do you want to, should we get you a hotel or something?" I said, "That's about an hour and a half. I'll just drive it." Which it worked out okay, but and it was nice to be able to be at home and on my own bed at night, but that's it made for very tiring days, because it's not as bad going over there. It's losing that hour coming home. But it was a great week, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be away, and thankful for so many that we have in the congregation here who are able and willing to step in and help out in those situations. So again, we are looking at questions Jesus asked, and we've just kind of been walking our way through these kind of on the back end here as we are in John chapter 13, getting toward the betrayal and crucifixion of Jesus. This section here in John 13, of course, is the Last Supper, Jesus washing the disciples' feet, and we looked at that in our last session. I guess that would be 2 weeks ago. But see if I can make that a little bit bigger for the folks in the back. Can you see that okay, Mike? All right, so working our way through this this section, we've got a couple, one more question here in John 13. I've said before, I have really enjoyed this study. I hope you have as well. I keep in touch probably several times a week through WhatsApp and or the Marco Polo app with my friend down in Costa Rica, Hainer Montialto, and he was telling me recently. He said almost every Sunday when I'm getting ready to leave, of course they're 2 hours behind us, at least when we're on daylight savings time. Once we fall back, they'll be 1 hour behind. But he said, I typically listen to your class. And he said, man, I really, really like that. So I said, well, I appreciate that. And so, hello, Hainer, if you're watching this morning. But John chapter 13, I'll just kind of pick up. I won't go back and rehash all that we talked about. But the last question we had was from the context of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And that was from verse 12. Do you know what I have done to you? And we talked about that, and just mainly wanted to reemphasize the point that if someone tries to turn this washing the feet into some kind of ceremonial religious service, they have utterly missed the point. And so sometimes people say, well, so Jesus said, I've given you an example. Does that mean we should be washing feet today? And some people have taken that very literally, and they have a foot washing service and things like that. Should I wash folks' feet today? Well, if that's a genuine need and there's a situation where that's how I can serve someone, sure. But as just a service, well, we're going to come in and I've told you before, I think it was on my mom's side of the family that there were some relatives that they attended some denomination that they actually did a foot washing service. And it was understood that you came in, at least on that Sunday, you had the cleanest feet, because, somebody's going to be getting down to wash my feet, and I don't want to be embarrassed. Again, totally missing the point. The point here is Jesus got down, his hands and knees, as it were, and he washed nasty feet. Not establishing some kind of religious ceremony, but showing them, if I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, can humble myself to get down and wash feet, a very humble act, an act that typically belonged to the servants. He says, I'm showing you what it means to be a servant leader. And that's the example. Sometimes the folks that have this as some kind of a religious ceremony, that they don't apply it to other aspects of life. Jesus says, I'm giving you a life example of what it means to lead, what it means to be a servant and to serve others. So, picking up where we left off, we kind of covered through this section down through about verse 20, and he's telling them, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither is he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. And he points out here, I speak not of you all, I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he that eateth bread with me hath lifted up his heel against me. And Jesus says, to paraphrase verse 19, I'm telling you beforehand, so that when it comes to pass, you may believe that I am. You'll notice this word there, he. I guess it helps to turn this thing on. This word he is italicized. This is one of those situations where I think it's better just to leave that off. He says, I'm telling you beforehand, so when it's come to pass, you may believe that I am. Just like in John 8:24 when he says, if you believe not that I am, you'll die in your sins. He is the I am. He's God in the flesh. So the italicized words are added by the translators. Pointed this out several times before. They're added for clarity, and I think most of the time they do clarify. But sometimes I think we're better off reading the text without them. And whenever I'm, whether it's studying or just going through my daily reading or just reading period, I always try to read a verse, a text I try to go back and read it without the italicized words and just sort of looking at it and considering, okay, is this clearer with the italicized words or without? And sometimes I find myself going, I think that's clearer without. Sometimes it helps with the flow. Sometimes it helps with clarity. Sometimes it's just better. And that's one man's opinion, but sometimes I think it's just better without it. So he says, I'm telling you beforehand so that when it happens, you'll know I am. And it's amazing how many times, you can go through the book of John and see how many times Jesus will make a statement where the King James translators have added that word he, where he'll say, I am he. And in the original, it just simply says, I am. And it's Jesus emphasizing over and over again, he is God in the flesh. Most of those, I just think it's a little bit better without that italicized word. So he says, verily, verily, or truly, truly, I say unto you, he that receiveth whomsoever I send receiveth me. He that receiveth me receiveth him that sent me. And then he's going to foretell his betrayal. When he had thus said, he was troubled in spirit. He testified and said, verily, verily, truly, I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. So they start to look one on another, doubting of whom he spoke. Now there's leaning on Jesus' bosom. We've talked about this before, how they didn't sit, they would not have been sitting in this situation at a table. You sometimes see who did that painting, The Last Supper? I can't remember all of a sudden. Does anybody know? Famous painting. Da Vinci. I started to say that, and I was like, sure as I say that, I'll be wrong. Thank you. Da Vinci's painting, The Last Supper, has them sitting at a table. But it wouldn't have been in this situation. Now, sometimes they did. They didn't always recline at table. And if you have a New King James, I believe, is one of the newer versions that a lot of times will have, instead of sitting at a table, it'll have reclined at table or something like that. That's the idea. And they would typically be leaned over on their left side. You're kind of leaning on your elbow, and there will be somebody behind you, and the person behind you, if you lean back to talk, it's that, and that's why you see this phrase, there was leaning on Jesus' bosom, one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. And we know from other studies in the book of John that's the disciple Jesus loved is a reference to John. So John kind of leans back to Jesus, and he can talk to him. He's obviously right next to him there around this triclinium, and we've talked about that before, where you have the U-shaped table. The servants can come in and they can walk inside of that U, and they can serve the people on the far end, on the left, on the right. And so Peter beckons to John that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, again, that idea of leaning back, and he asks, Lord, who is it? And not to belabor this point, because we have talked about it at length before, but just putting all the gospel accounts together, it sometimes seems almost confusing, because Jesus says it's Judas. In fact, you've got that right here in verse 26. Jesus answered, he it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. When he dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. After the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, that thou doest, do quickly. And when you look at some of the other gospel accounts, sometimes people are like, well, he says it's Judas, and yet they're all kind of looking around, and they say, why did Judas leave? What's going on? Who is it? Is it I, Lord? And when you put, especially John's account here, you see that Jesus says somebody's going to betray me. And they all, of course, who could that possibly be? Is it, Lord, is it I? Peter, and we've studied in another setting that we don't know for sure how they sat, but at least a possibility. Peter very well may have been kind of across. If you got this triclinium where it's open, like where I'm standing, and you'd have on to my right, to my left, and then in front of me, people reclined at place settings. It might well be that Jesus would be over here, and John, right next to him, is one of the hosts. He was one of the ones that Jesus sent to prepare the Passover. So he'll be kind of on that end. Again, quite possibly, might even say likely, but we don't know for sure. Then Jesus, then Judas, because Jesus seems to be right next to Judas as he's handing him that sop. But over here on the other side, quite possibly, again, maybe likely, you'd have Peter on the other end as one of the hosts. So you can picture Peter beckoning to John like, hey, ask him. And so John asks Jesus, leaning back and sort of privately asking, Lord, who is it? And Jesus sort of quietly saying to John, well, it's the one to whom I give this up. And of course he gives it to Judas. Satan enters into Judas. Jesus tells him, what you're doing, do quickly. Jesus is not in any kind of hurry. I think that goes without saying. It's kind of the idea, well, this is what you're going to do. Just get it over with, Judas. 28 tells us, now no man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. For some of them thought, because Judas had the bag, Jesus had said unto him, buy those things that we have need of against the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So the rest of them don't understand. Again, this having happened, a quiet statement from Jesus to John. But it says in verse 30, he then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was night. And it's amazing sometimes in Scripture you get these just brief statements that are so powerful, and that's one of them. And it was night. Oh, how dark that night was. This is the night of his betrayal. And there's so much packed just in that three-word statement. It was night. One of the darkest nights in the history of mankind, in the history of the world, and yet, without it, you and I, we have no hope whatsoever. So, verse 31, therefore when he was gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God be glorified in him, God shall also glorify him in himself, and shall straightway glorify him. Little children, yet a little while, I am with you. Ye shall seek me. And as I said unto the Jews, whither I go, ye cannot come. So now I say unto you, or say to you, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all know, or all men know, that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. So he gives this new commandment, and not that love one another is a new commandment, right? He says it's the extent of that love. Perhaps some significance to this being right on the heels of Judas going out. Judas was a betrayer, and he certainly did wrong in that, but should they still love Judas? They're going to be scattered from one another. They may be tempted later to say, well, Peter, you denied Jesus 3 times. Why should we take you back? He says, just love one another as I've loved you. And of course, Jesus' love is a long-suffering love. He's never condoning sin, and yet he is long-suffering with us. When we strive to do what is right, when we come in with penitent, contrite hearts, he'll forgive. And so he says, you love one another as I've loved you. Moving on to verse 36, this gets us in the context of our next question. Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, whither goest thou? Where are you going, Lord? Jesus answered him, Whither I go, thou canst not follow me now. Thou shalt follow me afterward. I wonder if that's a little bit of a play on words for Peter. You can't follow me where I'm going now, but you'll follow me afterward. Uninspired history, it's emphasis there on uninspired history, but there is a historical story, account. Again, it's uninspired, so we can't say it's 100% for certain, but there is tradition that tells us Peter was crucified for being a Christian and preaching the gospel, and that he requested to be crucified upside down because he felt unworthy to die in the same manner that his Lord did. But being crucified, the similarity of death there might be, if indeed that tradition is true, that might be sort of some of the reference here. It might simply be a play on words from the standpoint of, well, you can't follow me now, but you'll follow me afterward. In other words, you will leave this life one day. It's appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment, Hebrews 9:27. But I say a play on words because it seems somehow maybe it's tied to a physical death. Like Jesus, you're going to die, Peter. But, and it may be like Jesus, you're going to die for the faith, for the gospel's sake. But perhaps a play on words in that he's saying, where I'm going, you can't follow me now, but you'll follow me afterward. In other words, you're going to be, especially here in this context, you're going to be strengthened. Your faith is going to falter tonight, Peter, but you're going to be okay. Of course, he's going to deny the Lord 3 times, but he'll be restored later after the resurrection. And I'm going to tell you something. Peter was not perfect. He was human like anybody else. But after the resurrection, and particularly John 21, which we'll get to later on in our study, Peter was unwavering, even to the point that he died for the Lord. And so he says, you're not going to follow me now, but oh, what a follower, what a disciple you're going to be afterward. I don't know if I can say that for certain, but I read that verse and I thought, it almost seems like a little bit of foreshadowing and kind of a play on words that Peter maybe, well, I think it's probably fair to say almost certainly didn't understand at the time, but might very well be that he's looking toward Peter's unwavering faith after Jesus is risen. But of course, Peter in this moment says to him, Lord, why can't I follow you now? Truly, I say to you, Jesus says, or Peter says, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there in verse 38. He says, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake, Lord. What do you mean I can't follow you? I'll tell you what, wherever you go, I'm going to be there. And if somebody tries to mess with you, then they're going to have to go through me. Jesus says, and this is our next question, will you lay down your life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. Jesus says, New King James has it, will you lay down your life for my sake? It seems at this point, I've seen some folks that question, but I don't see any reason to suspect that they are not still in that upper room. It seems that they're still in that upper room, and he is, if you go to Mark's account, Mark predicts, or Mark has Jesus recorded as predicting that they would all be scattered from him that night. They would all forsake him that night. And here he's already said, one of you is going to betray me. And so, no doubt with all that in mind, that's kind of why Peter says, well, why can I not follow you? He at least picks up on something foreboding here. And he says, hey, I just want you to know, I'm going to go with you to the very end. And I think it's Matthew's account where you've got Peter saying, everybody else might forsake you, to paraphrase what he says. But he says, everybody else might forsake you, but not this old boy. I will go with you to the point of death. Now, I've asked the question before, but I'll ask it again here in this context. Did he mean it? I don't have any doubt he meant that. I mean, who among us has not fully intended and said, oh, I will never forsake my friend. I would never turn my back on you. I would never lie to you. And then in a moment of weakness, whatever the situation might be, we falter. I don't know a person that can't relate to that. I think Peter 100% meant this. And Jesus says, we might sort of paraphrase Jesus' words as, well, really? And he's not trying to be a smart aleck with Peter. He's not trying to be sarcastic. But Jesus knows what's going to happen. And so he says, well, you say that, Peter, and you can almost picture Jesus sort of smiling maybe and saying, I admire your enthusiasm now, but when the chips are down, the rooster's not even going to crow twice before you'll have denied me 3 times. And oh man, Brother Wayne Jackson, he refers a lot of times in his writings to subtle evidences of inspiration. And one of the subtle evidences that he often refers to in his writings is these statements, accounts, when you know there had to be so much more there that is just not recorded. And, you know, I would love to, and maybe that's one of those things when we get to heaven to ask the Lord. You know, there had to be more to that conversation, right? Jesus says, you know, verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. And Peter says, well, okay. Now, you know there was a response there. What did he say? I mean, maybe he argued. Maybe he went to argue and Jesus just said, hey, well, let's just drop it for now. I don't know. Yes, sir.
It may have been a time that Peter didn't know what to say.
And it could have been.
I mean, Peter was very vocal in a lot of situations, but in this situation, they've already been told that somebody's going to betray him. Judas leaves. Peter's standing there. He said, I'm not going to deny you. And then Jesus said what he did, and then Peter goes, you know, he knows everything, and obviously he knows this too.
Robert said this might have been an occasion when Peter just didn't know what to say. That'd be interesting in itself because there weren't very many occasions when Peter just had nothing to say, right? He tended to be a vocal person, in fact, impetuously vocal. So I don't know, but can you imagine? It might well be that it just simply is not recorded for us. And, you know, sometimes the Bible will just He just gives us what we need. Of course, all things for life and godliness, 2 Peter 1:3. Sometimes it leaves us when we're kind of asking questions, and that's kind of where, to Wayne's point, Brother Jackson's point, that subtle evidences of inspiration. Anybody writing a book just from a human standpoint, you want to answer these questions. You tend to want to fill in the blanks, and the readers are going to wonder about this. And the Bible, I mean, quite often, there are blanks that just don't get filled in. We don't know exactly why, other than that's just God's not chosen to give us all that information. And this is one of those where I just wonder, like, what was Peter's response? Maybe he says, oh, no. And maybe he tried to argue. Maybe Jesus just sort of shut that down. Or, as Robert said, maybe this was one of those rare occasions when Peter just was left speechless. Maybe almost scandalized by that statement. Like, how could you say that? And yet knowing that he's the Lord and he knows, maybe he's just sort of internally wrestling with that and doesn't have anything to say. I don't know. But, boy, I would love to have been there and heard the rest of that if there was any other conversation. But that's, as I said, I've got sort of my mental list. I need to start writing these down. I don't know. I guess I just trust the Lord to help me remember all the ones that I want to ask about when I get there. But that's Jesus' question to Peter is, will you lay down your life for my sake? And, of course, he points out, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he knew Peter was going to deny him, and that's exactly what happened, of course. And here's the thing. This is from Papaw's notes on this section. At that point in time, the Lord wanted Peter to live for him, not to die for him. Peter's got the commitment, the idea, and again, no doubt that he meant it, that I will go with you to the death. Again, I think it's Matthew's account where he particularly says everybody else may betray you, but not me. And here he comes out and expressly says, I'll lay down my life for you. Well, should we be willing to die for the Lord and for the gospel's sake? Absolutely. Sometimes people are willing to die when God is saying, right now, I need you to live for me. And so at this particular moment, he needs Peter to live for him, not die for him. And another note that Papaw had in his notes, and I think is very, very appropriate, sometimes we think more highly of ourselves and our commitment than we should. Sometimes people say, I don't know, it's been way back, it might have even been like in preaching school, when this question came up, what if you were living in Nazi Germany and you have hidden some Jews in your house, you're a Christian, and here comes some of the Nazi, what was it called, Gestapo, is that the right word? I don't know, I just went blank on that, but that's the word that came to mind. It is, okay. So here they come and they say, do you have any Jews in your house? We're rounding them up. And you say, no, I don't. Well, that's telling a lie. That's wrong. And so this debate went on about that. And one fellow was just very bluntly pointing out, well, that would be wrong and that would not be acceptable. You would have to make that right. Okay? But he went on to say, this one particular individual, well, I know what I would do. I would say, if I had them there, I'd just tell them, yes, I do. And I would die. If that's what they decide to do to me, or take me off to a camp or whatever. And then that sparked a whole other discussion. And somebody was saying, you say that. It's easy to say right now. Others would say something to the effect of, well, I sure hope I would have, maybe there's some other way that I could answer that question without lying, but if it came down to it, I would hope that I would hold true to the Lord. Maybe picture a first century setting where Christians are being persecuted and somebody says, "Are you a Christian?" Knowing that if you say yes and you're not going to, burn the incense to Caesar and say Caesar is Lord, that's going to cost you your life. But what do you do? This was a very real problem, by the way, in the first century and some of those early centuries after the establishment of the church, when people would get in those situations, and sometimes in that moment of life or death, literally life or death, they would yield. And they would burn that incense to Caesar and say, Caesar is Lord. And then later, they would be filled with such remorse. And they would come back. Maybe they come back to that. A lot of times Christians will worship in secret in the catacombs. And maybe they come back to that meeting of the church since they know where that is. And they meet with those Christians. And they're kind of like, whoa, what are you doing here? Well, I'm here. I messed up, y'all. I want to make this right. Well, it became a big debate in some of those early centuries after the basically nationwide persecution in Rome broke out. It became a huge debate. Well, can they come back? Can we take them back? And some people said, well, of course, you could be forgiven. But you had others that would say, oh, no, that's unforgivable. And it became a big debate. But my point being here is that sometimes in a moment we think, I know what I would do. I will go with you. I'll lay down my life for you, Lord. But again, when the chips are down, maybe we falter. Well, how do we handle that? Sometimes people just kind of become so distraught. Sometimes others want to be kind of like the elder brother and say, well, I don't think you should let him come back home, Father. Jesus, again, I think that kind of gets back to that previous statement. Maybe that's why he's saying, you love one another as I have loved you. And so he tells Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. All right, let's go on into John chapter 14. Our next question is down in verse 9, but verses 1 through 6 are familiar to us, where Jesus says, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Again, maybe this came right on the heels of his statement to Peter, and maybe before Peter can really even respond, Jesus starts with this statement. It's going to go on down through, well, you got Thomas that interjects in verse 5, but maybe that's the case. Maybe Peter was sort of left speechless, and so Jesus, perhaps as Peter's sitting there just wrestling with this in his mind, just launches into, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but sometimes people, and depending on your version, some versions have, in my Father's house are many rooms, something like that, as opposed to mansions. And some people have said, it's ridiculous. How do you have mansions within a house? Well, the house is the idea there of a household. Sometimes we sing songs about mansion over the hilltop, and I've even once or twice heard a preacher or a teacher kind of almost ridicule that. Well, it's not mansions, it's rooms. I don't care. Just put me in the Father's house. Give me a home. In fact, we'll be looking at Psalm 84, Lord willing, this morning in worship, and I'm kind of with the psalmist in verse 10 of Psalm 84 when he says, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. And when you study that context, I think it was Tom Waycaster, I was reading in his commentary that he said it's kind of like one who is standing at the gate, not necessarily a gatekeeper as far as I'm in charge of guarding the gate, but it's just you're there, not entering in, but you're kind of at the, we would say sort of at the door, and maybe it's that idea of, you got your face against the glass. We do that a lot because of the reflection of glass, and maybe you have to get your face right up against it and put your hands over here so you can see inside. He says, I'd rather be just able to peek inside from the doorway. We might say, and I've said it before, sort of in our vernacular, living in the South especially, I'd rather just be able to dwell on the front steps the front porch steps of heaven than to be given that place of honor in the tents, in the abode of the wicked. Whether it's rooms or mansions, I don't know. Again, people have debated that over and over again. Sometimes it was pretty common in Jewish culture that when a Jewish boy was ready to take a wife, he would do that. That was during that period of betrothment, which was much more of a legal commitment in their culture than it is for us. But during that time betrothal, he's getting things ready. And part of getting things ready is, a lot of times that meant building on to his father's house. And he would build a dwelling place for him and his wife. Now, in a situation where somebody's very wealthy, they might have servants that would do that. But among common folks, that was pretty common. You would build onto that, and sometimes you would have like extended families living in one location, but it's just build on, build on, build on, build on. And sometimes even multiple generations. Seems that's kind of a background here. And in that sense, it could be almost like a mansion, like, instead of just building on a little room or whatever, I'm building on an entire dwelling place, almost like a whole house upon a house. Again, whether it's a mansion or it's a room, I promise you, and Jesus promises, it's going to be wonderful, whatever it is. And so he says, I go to prepare a place for you. We've talked before about that culture and how they would, you got a young boy and maybe he's working with his father. He's kind of, we would call it like an internship, an apprenticeship, and he's training him. And, eventually the day comes when this boy, he's very adept at what his father has taught him, this trade, and maybe even to the point he might say something to his father like, hey, I can do this blindfolded. I think it's about time I'm ready to be kind of on my own. He doesn't necessarily mean he's going to move out, but ready to go from just a learner, an apprentice, to kind of the master now. And so, his dad may say, okay, well, I agree. I think you've really advanced very well. And he starts talking about taking a wife. And maybe he's got his eyes on somebody. And so they go and they speak to her father. She could, sometimes they would arrange marriages, but she had the option. It wasn't just like, excuse me, it wasn't like in every situation she didn't have a choice. She had that option. And usually, though, if he's to the point where he and his father are going to go and approach her father, he's got a pretty good feeling about that. And so if the two fathers can agree on things, and of course there was a dowry involved, and then they would, tradition tells us, they would drink from the same cup, and that's kind of making that covenant. Then they would call the young lady in. Here's what we've talked about. Here's what we've agreed upon. What say ye? And if she says, absolutely, yeah. And again, he pretty well knows that going into it typically. So she agrees. Now her and the young man drink from the same cup, and that they just take a drink, and that's kind of a symbolic, they've made a pact here. Now they are betrothed. And that was a very serious commitment. You see this in Matthew 1 with Joseph and Mary, and he was going to put her away. That involved a putting away if you broke off that betrothal. So now they are betrothed, but he's going to go back and he's got to prepare things. He's got to get a place ready for them to live. You got to have a place to live. You're going to get married. You're not going to just live in mom and dad's house, right? So he's going to build on, prepare a place. Seems to be that all of that culture and how that proceeded in their culture is the backdrop for Jesus' statements here. Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you into myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Well, this young man would say to the young lady, oh, man, they're excited. They're betrothed. And, man, all the excitement that comes with the engagement. And he would say, now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start, first thing tomorrow, and every day I'm going to be working. I'm going to prepare us a place, and when it's ready, I'm going to come and I'm going to receive you to myself, and we are going to be together forever, happily ever after. And don't you know, she eagerly anticipates that day, and she waits, and lots of people are talking about it. And maybe they're asking the young man, when's the big day? You see, there's going to be a feast. There's going to be a celebration now, depending on the father's wealth. It might be a day or so. It could be an entire week or more. But there's going to be a celebration. Everything's got to be just so. Dad's got to sign off on this once he's built on and prepared that place. Dad's got to approve, the father of the house. And when he does, the man comes for his bride. And you didn't always know when that was going to be. Typically didn't know when that was going to be. And so Jesus gives this parable in Matthew 25 about 10 virgins, 5 wise, 5 foolish. Some of them didn't have enough oil. They were waiting for the bridegroom. They knew it was close, but they didn't know the exact moment. Again, the same backdrop. Well, the church is the bride of Christ, Ephesians 5, 21 through 33. And Jesus says, be ready. I'm going to prepare a place, and I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And then he says, whither I go, you know, and the way you know. And that's when Thomas jumps in. Ironically, Thomas instead of Peter. Maybe Robert's observation has got something to it there, where Peter just is, at this point, one of the few times he's sort of left speechless. Because it's Thomas this time that interjects. Lord, we know not whither thou goest. We don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Jesus, of course, says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Then he says, if you had known me, you should have known my Father also. And from henceforth you know him and have seen him. And that brings another interjection, this time from Philip. Lord, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us. Show us the Father, that'll be enough. That will strengthen us. And here's Jesus' question in verse 9. Have I been so long time with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip? New King James says, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He that hath seen me has seen the Father. How sayest thou then, show us the Father? 2 questions here really in the same verse. Have I been so long time with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip? And then the latter part of the verse, how sayest thou then, show us the Father? He's addressing these to Philip, but obviously it's to the group as well. Again, it's hard to say. Some folks will say, oh, they've left the upper room at this point. I don't know. I just don't see anything there that I could say with certainty. And so that leads me, just from a common sense standpoint, to think, well, it seems that they haven't. In fact, he's going to say, let me find it. It's right here in this chapter. Oh, it's at the end of the chapter, verse 31. But that the world may know that I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, even so I do. What's the last phrase there? Last sentence. Arise, let us go hence. So it seems to me that is the most logical breaking point of, okay, they're leaving the upper room. But some commentators will say they're out of the upper room, and that let us go hence is when they're heading toward the garden. But anyway, it just seems to me it makes more sense that probably they're still in the upper room here. And so Jesus tells them, when Thomas asks about the way, he's the way, the truth, the life. Philip asks, show us the Father. That'll suffice us. Jesus has been with them, particularly his apostles here, 3 years. Some 3 years he's been with them. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And that's the point here with his question. Well, have I been so long time with you, and yet you've not known me? If you know me, you know the Father. He'd shown the Father by his actions, by his words. He's the very image of God. That's Hebrews 1 through 3. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us how? By his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world. And he goes on in verse 3 and it says, who being the express image of his person. we say, I don't know if it's a Southern expression or just a Southern expression or not, but we sometimes say, maybe to a young man, boy, you are the spitting image of your daddy. Jesus is the express image of the Father. All right, we'll have a few more comments on that, and then wrap up chapter 14 with one more question, and then move into the next section of the book of John and some more questions. Thank y'all so much. I hope you're enjoying the study. I know I am. And we'll have a short break before our worship begins this morning. Thank you.